how far have we gone since the Great War? Of the Great War itself, I have very little to say. I know that I'm quite old, but not that old. My father was 9 years old in 1914, and my mother just 3. The Great War, I think, exhausted Britain and France and helped precipitate the prominence of the United States as the new major power in the transatlantic relationship and beyond. It also acted as a midwife for the Russian Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union as the soon-to-be other superpower for a time. For the region I come from, the Great War was important in that it led to the Sykes-Picot Accord, whereby Britain and France divided between themselves the Arab provinces of the defeated Ottoman Empire. During the war, the British had made explicit but contradictory promises to the international Zionist movement on the one hand and to the Palestinians and the Arabs on the other. It is reported that a British diplomat told the French counterpart that Britain, and I quote, had no intention of keeping its promises made to a bunch of Bedouins. And they did not keep those promises. In many ways, the problems we and the rest of the world have faced in the Middle East ever since, not least around the Palestinian question, are mostly the direct and lasting consequence of what has been done, undone, or not done during and as a result of the Great War. As for World War II, what I remember of it as a child is, first of all, that there was a shortage of everything in our country, in Algeria. I remember also the envy with which, as kids, we saw older boys making 1 or 2 francs out of the flourishing black market in which some American soldiers were happily indulging. There was widespread hunger in the countryside, and in many parts of the country, it was a famine. One of the images that continue to haunt me in my memory is that of man wandering in the fields, dressed in rags, weak, shivering in the cold, trying to find roots that could be boiled to provide a poorly nutritious meal. And there was the typhus epidemic that decimated entire families. On the very day the Allied forces achieved victory, the 8th of May, 1945, the French responded to peaceful demonstrations in the eastern part of Algeria with a brutal repression in which artillery and even airplanes were used. It is estimated that up to 45,000 people were killed. That was probably the time when we in Algeria, in our collective unconscious, we understood that colonial rule would not end peacefully in our country. The Great Corps was called by the French, and I presume by everybody else, including by you here in Belgium, La Guerre des Guerres, the last war forever. And the winners thought that they were doing in Versailles what was necessary to ensure that there won't be another war. But as A.J.P. Taylor, the distinguished British historian, documented, the decisions taken by these winners of the war in Versailles contributed in no small measure to World War II less than 20 years later. The winners of the Second World War did a little bit better. The United Nations is certainly not perfect, and there are many objective reasons to criticize its records as well as its actions at present, but it has done significantly better than the League of Nations. The UN Charter outlawed war altogether, and the organization aimed and continues to strive at achieving a systematic codification of how to structure a peaceful international order. It has not succeeded yet, but it is still trying. On the whole, the post-World War, the Second World War system managed the Cold War with a reasonable measure of responsible manner. Although we came to the brink of an annihilating nuclear disaster several times, a third world war was avoided, and that was no mean achievement. The end of the Cold War in 1899, symbolized by the fall of the Berlin Wall, was welcomed as a hugely positive development. It was thought that now, at last, conflict would be a thing of the past, and the promise of the Charter of the United Nations would be fulfilled. But it was soon realized that things were somewhat more complicated. The Cold War ended not through the laudable efforts of all to bring about détente and peaceful coexistence, but just as any war has ended in the past, with a winner and a loser. The United States took it for granted that as the winners, it was both their responsibility and their right to establish single-handed, alone, the new international order and work out the new rules that would govern international relations in the future. This view, as you all know, was reflected in American thinking, in particular in the American Century Project of the neoconservatives, in the saying that America is the indispensable country of President Clinton and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and in the end of history of Professor Francis Fukuyama. Professor Huntington, for his part, wanted to be prophetic and spoke of a clash of civilization. In May 1991, some of you may remember, not long after his victory in the first Gulf War, President Bush the father triumphantly pronounced at the United Nations the advent of a new world order on the ruins of the Cold War era. We know today that that pronouncement was premature. What we have had since the fall of the Berlin Wall is a long transition period. A new world order is still in the making. Bush Jr. decided for his part that the 11th of September 2001 was his Pearl Harbor. He saw himself as a war president, a kind of reincarnation of Franklin Roosevelt, leading a vast alliance to fight what he called the global war on terror in all corners of the world. That concept of a global war on terror was misguided, and the most misguided part of it was undoubtedly the invasion of Iraq. It was an unbelievable mixture of arrogance, cynicism, insensitivity, cruelty, and ignorance that undoubtedly produced war crimes and crimes against humanity that no one has accounted for yet. A war of choice, as it was called, that has inflicted untold harm to the people of Iraq, to the stability of the region, and to the United States itself. President Barack Obama came with the best of intentions and enjoyed enthusiastic support at home and the United States, at home in the United States and around the world. He was even given a Nobel Prize for Peace before he did much to deserve it. Today, as he prepares to enter the race for a second term, he is blamed for what his predecessor did and for what he, Obama, has failed to do. American domination, for the moment, is wobbling, and American standing in the world has been seriously damaged. But those who are in a position to challenge the leadership of the United States, China chief among them, are not in a hurry to do so. They are aware that America remains, after all, by far the biggest military power on earth. Furthermore, even ailing the US economy still accounts for about 20% of the world economy. America cannot be written off, but it has to relearn how to accept others with it at the top table.